Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Beware the Artist. I am Jeremy Jersa, and this week on the show we have Justin Mortimer. Justin, if you want to go ahead and tell everyone who you are and what is it that you do.
Hello, my name is Justin Mortimer. I'm talking to you from the UK. I'm sitting in my very cold studio where I paint pictures for a living.
So, Justin, you are an accomplished painter. What themes do you find yourself exploring in your work?
Well, lately it's been getting back to the darkness, I'd say. Having spent maybe 2 years painting flowers, having said that, flowers that were in that space between life and death, I have to say, they weren't smiley, happy pictures of flowers. But now the figurative stuff's coming back in. The people are starting to act out various ideas and stories I want to explore. And that's all going back to a lot of my portrait work that I used to do back in the day. Kind of the face coming back, the figure, that kind of stuff starting to happen again.
So, what made you kind of move to those flowers to begin with?
Well, I suppose I just go with how I feel at the time by what I witnessed and what I saw once when I was on holiday in France. I walked into a very dark church and I'd happened to see some kind of votive flowers that had been left to kind of wilt and quietly fade away in the corner. And they were just in like an old little jam jar. And I photographed them on my phone with the flash, a very crude photograph. And there was something about the way the flash revealed elements of this sort of biosphere that was existing in this tiny jar that were really surprising. And I thought, well, that's something I'm really interested in. And I wasn't expecting to be. I mean, I've painted still lifes many times before. There was something about the way the flash sort of vivisected the image somehow. And it began a whole journey for me of using quite abstract, intuitive way of painting, along with very quite graphic, distilled marks, draftsmanship. And I just carried on playing with it and seeing how far I got with it. And it just grew and grew and grew. And then in the end, I ended up painting about 10 very, very large versions of these flowers as well against these abstract backgrounds. And it was just a fun thing to do. And I felt the feedback I was getting from the work was fresh and interesting. And it's that kind of sensibility which I discovered in those works, I want to bring back into the figurative work, which I'm now exploring.
Nice, nice. I love that you're now taking something that you learned from that experience and then bringing it to what you're kind of more known for in a certain sense.
Yeah, fair enough. I felt I mean, I may be known for doing figures, but also I really want to use the figurative form as well to tell stories. And having got this wider vocabulary through the flower explorations I was making, I felt that I could inject that kind of figurative work with something fresh for me and something surprising, which is what I'm always looking for, I suppose. Otherwise,
Yeah.
frankly, it just gets really dull.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking of just kind of excitement within your work, one thing that's always really excited me about your paintings are these kind of simultaneous realities within your work, and at points
Okay.
it feels as though that the paintings themselves are only just a couple strokes away from almost imploding in their
All
in their
right.
kind of creation. Can you speak to these kind of simultaneous realities and also maybe describe your relationship between figuration and abstraction?
Well, I think the abstract element that came into the work just came in. Uh, it just felt natural. It just grew within me, and I allowed it to do that. I didn't want to force myself into anything, so I'm always open to something. So with the abstraction that developed, it just seemed right somehow because reality, when you've been painting realistic, illusionistic pictures for so long, prosaic qualities in reality sometimes can become quite dull and boring. I don't want to paint every single radiator tube, pipe, every single flex, all that kind of stuff. And I felt the tension with the abstract allowed a kind of me to relax as a painter. I could enjoy color again. Could enjoy marks. not having to be restricted by a certain reality. I would allow myself some realities, like say the way light describes an arm, or a crease describes an arm, say, and I will enjoy that. But if I wanted to put it against a big yellow color field, why not? And also that's something that I used to do many years ago. I used to paint very flat pictures, very highly colored paintings. And then around about 2000, I stripped the color all the way out and went very dark, or initially monochromatic. And I suppose I'm just bringing the two back together again, having gone through that whole bandwidth of exploration. I want to come back to that. But to answer another part of your question, there's something about the tension between a reality and abstraction, and to the point where it almost falls apart. The illusion starts to fragment, and which you allude to in the way the paintings are like two brush strokes away from collapse. And I really like that. I mean, I've often spoken to people, well, occasionally I've spoken to people and they've said about my work that it kind of annoys them that it's like, why do I never quite reveal it completely to the viewer? And I like that. I like the hidden, I like the obfuscation, the clouding, the mystery. Huh? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you give people an opportunity to really sink into the image itself through this kind of decoding of what it is that they're looking at, and then the image slowly starts to reveal itself in a really interesting way.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I've always tried to reject spoon feeding the viewer, saying, right, now look at this bit, and this is this bit, and you can clearly see how clever I've been here painting that fingernail. I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in that mystery, and the viewer has to work a little bit harder. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that gives longevity to an image as well. When it works, sometimes it can just, the abstractness just be far too much and the whole thing collapses. But when it does start to work, it surprises me. And I have to work a little bit harder about what actually is happening in this picture. You know, when the floors disappeared, when pictorial space starts to collapse, you have to wonder what actually is happening in this painting. And then I have to maybe go back in, dig a little bit deeper, and maybe give a few more clues about what's happening, just a few pointers. But then the next day I might come in and just scrape it all off again, and it becomes more and more difficult. And in fact, I think my more successful paintings are the ones that are trickier and definitely more awkward to read. Yeah.
So, how are you making these choices? How are you saying
Well,
when is it enough to kind of stop?
that is the question that every artist struggles with, I think. And you know, it really bugs me when I paint, when the first marks are really good, but I really want those marks to have been a different color or different tonal weight or something like that. And so I go in and then do it again, and then the work gets more and more worked at, and it's rubbish. So somehow it's almost as if I should sort of do a rehearsal on another piece of canvas, and then when I'm really super hot and, you know, cooking away nicely, then I do that first draft on the big canvas, say, and that's the one that'll stay. I won't go back in and rework it and yeah.
So how does a painting actually start for you?
Well, I tend to go through secondhand books, internet, of course, images that I've collected over the years, which I have collected and scanned onto my computer, along with a lot of photographs I take. Very bad photographs, I have to say, which is kind of the point, really. Anything too artistic, I reject. But and I end up with this big kind of pile of ingredients, which I then just play around with and see what sparks off with each other, or sets off an idea, or just, it could just be a shape or a color, a tension of line, something like that. And that might be the starting point for a picture. And I might spend a week or a couple of hours, depending on how lucky I am, because it is totally intuitive. And it is quite a lot of luck's involved as well. And I'll build up a semblance of some kind of mise en scène, some kind of, you know, cooking away nicely. Then I do that first draft on the big canvas, and then when I'm really super hot and, you know, cooking away nicely, then I do that first draft on the big canvas, and then that's the one that'll stay. I won't go back in and rework it and mise en scène, some kind of happening. It's like a stage set, in fact. And then I'll probably just collapse the whole thing, use the elements that I've used with the knowledge that I've gained through playing around with them, like a choreographer, just testing their dancers or exercising their actors, if you like. And then gradually bring it all together. I make a print from this digital collage that I make, and I'll square up a canvas and square up the print. And the print is like my model. So that's my reference material. And the next day, invariably, I'll have a slight change of idea or something is suggested. I've suggested something to myself, and I'll make another collage and then apply that next layer of paint from that collage on top of the previous day's work. So it's like a palimpsest. Things grow, and that's why I always have grid is often. People ask me why the grid's always there, which I use purely just as a scaling up tool.
Mm-hmm.
But it's always there because every day I tend to regrid to add in the next layer, you know. So that's why it sort of stays there on the surface. And also I just really, really enjoy painting over things and seeing how things crunch together and looking for those serendipitous moments where two layers of my collage or collage painting come together. So a byproduct of working like that means that I have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pieces of paper, which are my digital collages, which I print out, which is exciting, you know, and I do love that. And I have quite a nice archive of those now. Yeah.
Do you think you'll ever kind of release them in some kind of book, just kind of documenting that?
Yeah, interestingly, that there is a possibility that might happen. Yeah, but
Yeah.
it's very, very early days thinking about that.
Interesting, interesting. So when you're in the studio and you're working, what is the atmosphere in your space? Do you have music playing? Do you have podcasts? What's going on?
Yeah, I mean, music really is a big part of my life, and up until a few weeks ago, I was playing music every day on my stereo in the studio, but my 1970s quad stereo system has decided to break again. So I've sent it back to factory in Cambridge to get it fixed again. I mean, it is literally from 1970, I think, but it's fantastic. Of course, I stream stuff from my phone onto my headphones. I'm listening to that quite a lot. My studio's unheated, so I work often. I've got about 6 layers on under here. I'm actually quite a skinny guy, and it kind of looks a bit bigger, but yeah, it's absolutely freezing. I'm only not wearing a hat just for pure vanity for this situation. Yeah. I mean, I've got quite a nice big space. It's been difficult getting here during this whole outbreak. I mean, in March, I just set up a little studio at home in my spare room, which is about 6 or 7 miles away from here. But that's a good 40-minute drive. 40 minutes. Well, I'm driving back to this studio now because it's a bit risky now to travel on the underground system here, which
Right.
I usually do, and which I like because after a day's painting, I paint from about 10 till 7 in the evening. And no, a bit earlier, actually, maybe 6 o'clock, I stop. And I like to get on the tube and do the crossword, or I've taken photographs of my painting I've just been working on. And I'll often sit on the tube and do digital drawings on my phone, really crudely, just working out compositions for the next day. I'll flip the image, I'll turn it upside down. It's that kind of liminal moment between work and home. So by the time I've got home, my partner's there and she's doing what she's doing, and we can just relax and I can switch off completely from the studio. And that's why it was kind of interesting to see how it would work having the lockdown studio at home, to see if we could both work in the same space without killing each other. Turned out we could just about do it. It was a bit difficult at first, but
So how important is play and experimentation with your studio practice?
yeah, pretty much. I mean, with the flowers that we touched on, what was really exciting about that was the element of play involved in that process. I used a lot of acrylic paint to create these abstract backgrounds, very free, very loosely. I was putting the canvas on the floor and literally throwing the paint at it, and manipulating it, and just seeing where it would go. And for me, that was really, really interesting. Okay, maybe it's day one on your foundation course, but for me, it was truly liberating. And I would photograph those abstract sort of mud pies I was making, and then work out what was going to go on top. But the point was, I was just having really good fun in the studio, and that's why the series kept going. And And then I started incorporating sprayed paint into it, which was fun as well.
Was that your
Yeah.
first experience with sprayed paint into the
I mean,
paintings?
I'd used cans before,
Hmm.
but I didn't. It wasn't the only thing is they're acrylic or enamel or lacquer, and it doesn't work. It's not stable with the oil paint. So I started to spray acrylic on a base layer and then oil on top. And then once I was all hazmated up with various respirator stuff, I was spraying oil as well. But it's not to be recommended. It's pretty damn toxic.
Yeah, yeah.
But it worked. It did work. Yeah.
So some of your imagery in your paintings, it comes from these disparate sources, these disparate materials, and
Yeah.
they come together to create kind of their own narrative. You spoke a little
Yeah.
bit to it in the beginning about not wanting to spoon feed the viewer, but how
Mhm.
much of the narrative are you controlling, and how much of the narrative are you kind of leaving open for the audience?
Bit of both, really. Bit of both. I want to get down what I want to get down, and then I just they take on their own life, you
Hmm.
know, and I can only see it through my own objective eye. I mean, when it's out there and other people are seeing it, it's incredible how blind I've been to glaring problems. Or, I mean, I like to run my pictures past my girlfriend at home because she'll spot a massive uh, compositional benefit or issue, and we can discuss that. You know, so that's quite a good. It's quite a good way of working. Oh,
Yeah. Also, it seems as though there's this really interesting kind of relationship between color and light in your paintings. There seem to be some things that become actual vehicles for color and light within your compositions.
oh yes, yes. Before I was doing the abstract work, I was looking for those vehicles. So
Mm,
those vehicles certainly about 7 years ago became uh, flares that were either released at a football game, a riot, um, or CS gas canisters, backlit CS gas canisters, stuff like that, which I was looking at from race riots in the US and France and
yeah.
places, and you know, places like that, which now, of course, have become more prescient, well, everything. But there's always been unrest. But anyway, those were vehicles I was trying to use to create just a new environment, a new atmosphere, which I wanted to explore. And I suppose then I was using the flares and the smoke bombs purely for their local color. Now I tend to bring color in a more oblique way. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm confused. I don't know. But yes, that's certainly what I was trying to do with those subjects.
So I like to ask this question to every artist that I have on the show. But if there is one piece of art that you have to experience in person before you die, what is that one
All
piece
right.
of art you want to see?
Uh, well, I tell you what, I'd love to see the cave paintings in France. You know, the
Mm,
10,000-year-old cave paintings. I mean, you
yeah.
can't get to them now. There's just a facsimile's been made, which you have to experience, which is fine. Um, I'd love to see Kate Bush live, another type of art, you know, stuff like that. Apart from that, the actual art I'd like to experience. I don't have a number one painting I want to see before I die, or a piece of art. It'd be something more to do with a trace of past civilization, like a ruin, or pigment blown around someone's hand in a cave
Hmm.
millennia ago. That to me, great.
And who would you call some of your kind of influences that have kind of influenced your career or influenced the type of paintings that you actually make?
Um, yeah, it's a surprisingly tricky question to answer, and I can tell you pictures I've always been looking at. I mean, I had a very good art teacher at school when I was a schoolboy, and she introduced me to 19th century French painting, and I think that's where my love of Degas has always come from.
Mm,
Um, and that's someone I always go back to. I know he's a grumpy old bastard or whatever, but I don't really care. I just want to look at the way he exploded the whole image, pushing things around, the color, and it's also his touch, which I find endlessly fascinating. So,
mm,
someone I always look at. I mean, contemporary painting, I tend to look at a lot of abstract painting. Interestingly, I don't. seek out figurative painting. But a lot of art I really do like is art that's made without that big kind of heavy I'm making art label stuck to it. So a lot of outsider art, folk art, art that's made by accident by people. I really get a big kick out of that, you know. I mean, as for figurative painting now that I look at, I suppose I was very involved and interested in the Leipzig school that emerged maybe 20 years ago, and a lot of the work that was coming from the former Eastern Bloc, because of course they were all trained to make
Mm.
figurative art. And when I left art school, that was a big no-no in UK. Um, so I did take succor from those artists because there wasn't a lot of figuration happening in the UK when I left college, apart from someone who's well known like maybe Jenny Saville.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but when you came out of school, kind of the YBAs were like the
Mm.
hot ticket. That was the
Yeah, yeah.
trend. And you are this kind of classically trained figurative artist. Yet you kind of stuck to your vision and you kept making work. Many of my former classmates and current students, sometimes to their detriment, they give into those trends. Um,
Right.
what was it like for you to kind of, stick to your guns? Can you speak to that experience and just kind of
Yeah,
trust in
well,
your own vision?
yeah. I mean, I left art school um, in 1992. So YBA scene in London and internationally was absolutely embedded in the system and institutions. So um, I did go to an art school called the Slade, which is part of the Slade, which is part of University College London, which does have a kind of a figurative tradition, but it was very much on the wane when I left. And there were some famous British painters there teaching, people like Ewan Uglow, like that, who came from this school, the London school. But I
Mhm.
didn't have so much contact with him, maybe occasionally on a Friday evening, but at the end of a session. But I actually rejected a lot of that was when I was at art
Mm.
school. I wanted to have more time to explore. But having come out from art school and having the YBAs around me, it was very, very tricky. And there was no one was interested in figurative painting apart from the way to survive as a figurative painter was to become a portrait painter, which I did by default, really. And there is and has there is and was a very strong portrait scene. It meant that I was able to paint portraits of people to get a studio. It was my job. So for that, I was very thankful. But curators weren't putting together figurative shows. Young artists weren't making figurative paintings. So I just really had to just dig in deep, do the portraits, make enough to pay the studio rent and for home, and just tell my own stories with my own paintings. And then gradually, only until very, very recently, have people really given a shit about this kind of work. And for that, I'm really grateful. You know, but I had to stick to guns, and I don't know, pigheadedness. Um, it's what I've always done. It's also all I'm kind of good at. I'm not very good at anything else, but I do like to draw and I do like to paint. And so it was just natural to do it. And of course, when I was younger, I did get waylaid by fashions of the time and things like that. And you just have to negotiate your way out of it by working all the time and getting feedback from friends and keeping your eyes open.
So in your opinion, what can painting say that other mediums cannot?
Well, for me, it's the presence of the artist in
Mm.
front of that canvas, which is there when I look at a painting. And I find that endlessly magical. I mean, just even the most well-known paintings, say like maybe Picasso or someone like that. For me, it's standing in the space that he stood at in front of that painting, and then seeing the traces of his hands, or any other artist say. I love that. It's like being able to travel in time. You know, it's
Mm.
fantastic. You're suddenly in touch with the person, that human being like yourself who made that work, and the humanity in that I find endlessly moving. A bit like the way a really good piece of vinyl
Mm.
had recorded those actual vibrations that were made at the time, and it's that connection. I like that very much.
I love that reference to the vinyl. There's something human
Right.
about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, when I also kind of have these interviews, another question I love to ask is, what is the best advice you have received over the years? And what is one piece of advice that you would like to give to a kind of up and coming generation of creatives?
Oh, well, certainly to answer the first question, someone once said to me, play to your strengths.
Mm,
Thought, yeah, okay, that sounded very simplistic, but in fact, it's still something I have to remember. When I was talking about being distracted by fashions and things like that, whilst keeping an eye open, but do what you're good at and you'll enjoy it. Because often, if you're good at something and it will come easily. If it comes easily, people tend to mistrust that. If it comes easily, that's not a bad thing. You're allowed
mm,
to enjoy that. So yeah, play to your strength. As for the second question, what to say to up and coming artists? Well, I don't know really. Try to enjoy yourself and be prepared to work really, really hard
uh-huh.
and, uh, and train yourself to be able to focus for long periods of time on your own. Then you should be okay, you know. Read lots of books, watch lots of films, listen to lots of music, try to speak to your friends as often as possible, and keep your eyes open, keep looking. I mean, for me, art, what I love about being an artist is it makes me look at stuff that no one else has noticed in the world. Could
Mm,
be the way an old tea bag sits on a shelf or a blade of grass, something that just walk past without looking at. When you're an artist, you have a trained eye, and the world, however boring a situation you might be in at that moment, will be interesting. And I love that.
that's beautiful. That's such a great. I think that's a great place to kind of end this conversation. I want to leave on
Excellent.
that note.
Yeah.
So with that all being said, if people are looking for your work, where might they be able to find it?
Well, probably the best place to find is through my Instagram account and my website, which is basically justinmortimer.co.uk is my website, and it's Justin Mortimer Artist on Instagram. As for institutions and stuff, I'm still waiting for those. I have a couple of portraits in the National Portrait Gallery here in London, but yeah, online obviously is the easiest way to find the work because the actual paintings themselves are mostly in private collections. So they're all tucked away, sadly. Happy for me because I've sold them, but not so good for the audience. Yeah.
All right, Justin, thank you so much for being on the show. This was an absolute pleasure for me.
Hey, Jeremy, you're
Um,
welcome. Yeah.
Everyone, if you're looking for Justin's work, make sure you check it out, and I will see you all next week. All right, thanks. See ya.